Hello, and welcome to Good Morning Enablement. I'm Maria White, and I'm thrilled to be here with Tara Torkelson. Tara Torkelson was previously the Director of Content Development and Delivery at Twilio, and then moved into the Director of Training Operations and Technology role. She has built industry award-winning content, not only for virtual instructor-led training, but also for in-person training. She also doubles on the side, doing it for sales kickoff events as well. Tara Torkelson is joining us to share her insights and expertise on the pros and cons of virtual instructor-led training and in-person training. So let's think about this for a moment. Is virtual really more impactful than in-person? At Good Morning Enablement, we're all about bringing the real enablement insights to you and your executives to help inform, update, and get you where you need to be to thrive. So before we dive in, I'll tell you a little piece about myself. I'm Maria White, a seasoned sales leader and more recently sales enablement vice president, previously working at Twilio, ServiceNow, HPE, and Oracle. So here we want to bring those insights from enablement talent with other experts throughout the industry to share their insights on topics that matter to you. And hopefully we'll have some fun along the way. So without further ado, thank you so much, Tara, for being with us again. Welcome to the show. So let's get to it. Is virtual instructor-led training more impactful than in-person training? I mean, if anyone's going to know, you're going to know. You've been doing this for a very, very long time, very much focused on the training. So let's talk about the pros and cons of each, if that's okay. Let's start off with virtual instructor-led training. How do you think virtual training can be beneficial for the learners?
Well, and just a level set, when we talk about virtual training, that term can be used either to describe self-paced training or live instructor-led training that's delivered virtually. And we'll focus mostly on that. But at a high level, when you have virtual training, especially in self-paced, it really offers a little bit more flexibility. If it's a virtual instructor-led, you have a little bit more flexibility of scheduling the trainings. You don't have to worry about the logistics of moving people around. If it's a virtual self-paced, that of course gives the learner more flexibility on when they want to complete their training, when they want to actually go back and revisit it again. That's one of the advantages of self-paced virtual, is it can be used as a reference point so that a learner can go back and review certain content. Now, when it comes to even instructor-led, some learners are just more comfortable learning at their own pace or learning in their own personal space versus having to travel somewhere. So there are a few benefits to that.
Thank you. And Tara, in your experience, what are the advantages of virtual training versus in-person training? And I am referring to virtual instructor-led training for this question.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first, as I mentioned briefly, it's that flexibility. When you don't have to worry about the logistics of travel. I mean, think about it, even if it's a half-day training, that's going to be probably, at least a day of travel, either flying in the day before or leaving later. So you've got a lot more challenges when it comes to scheduling, both for the trainer as well as the attendees. So virtual, you can actually have a little bit better scheduling. It's also environmentally much more friendly. It can help reduce, the overall carbon emissions and just save energy by eliminating the need for travel, whether it's by car, train, or by plane, and also physical training spaces. So in that respect, it also is going to give you some reduced costs because you're not paying for the training spaces, you're not paying for all of that travel, and you're also not paying for time lost out of the field if you're training sales or anyone else. If they're only spending a couple hours of training versus the whole day of training and travel, they're back into doing their normal job rhythm a little bit quicker.
So can you help us understand, how does virtual training help to make learning more accessible to people?
Well, as we just mentioned, it eliminates the need for travel. Now, that's not only an advantage for audiences, especially if you have global audiences who have to have a much longer travel, but there are also some people who live in remote areas, so travel's a little bit more difficult. Or some people just have circumstances that overall makes it difficult for them to physically travel. So eliminating that, virtual instructor-led makes it a little bit more even playing field for those. Secondly, virtual training can actually be set up to be done in multiple languages at the same time. There's some wonderful technology out there where you can have a live interpreter. You can have multiple interpreters available in the same training session. So for global audiences, they can listen in their own language, which often is going to increase the retention and just the understanding of what's being trained. And then finally, when you're doing virtual, again, because of some great tools and technology, is you can better build in some ADA accessibility options, especially to help those who may be hearing or visually impaired, or if people want to read versus just listening, because everybody learns a little bit differently. So it does give you a little bit more options for accessibility as well.
Can you share with us some of your examples of the successful virtual led instructor trainings that you've seen or been a part of, but also as well adding on to what made them effective?
Yeah, and actually I want to start with the last. What makes them effective is how you build and design it. The last thing anybody wants is to attend a training where you're sitting in a virtual classroom and you're just listening to somebody speak. You're going to lose engagement. As a learner, that's the last thing I want. It's like, how can I skip forward? How can I do other things, and multitask? So you want to use technology to its fullest to really keep people engaged. And that's where we've built some really successful programs. Every day there's new technology coming into the market that's going to enhance that virtual learning experience. One of my favorites is, the newer technology of AI simulations. But there's also new advances in enablement gaming, even virtual room engagement tools that you can apply. As I mentioned, I've been part of several programs that leverage this newer AI simulation technology. And what that did and what made it so successful is it allows learners to interact with scenarios, real life client personas and profiles, and allows them to practice conversations. Now, this tool then provides immediate feedback and lets them continue to practice. So we combine that with, we'll have a short session with the live facilitator, and then we'll give them time in that session. Okay, now use this tool, and then come back in. What else we've done that's made it successful is you've got to have frequent learner interaction, and you've got to vary it up. Use as many modalities as you can. So, build in knowledge checks in the form of a quiz or even a poll when you're in a virtual room, or you can do breakout rooms. There's a lot of great technology that you can use. Even, you can use Jamboards or anything else, and get creative. One time, as a follow-up, we did a live session, but then as a follow-up takeaway assignment, I challenged everybody in a contest to create a limerick about that topic. And we had a central area where we posted. So that also got people thinking about the topic, reinforced it because they did it after the session, and let them get really creative. And then we made it competitive with a competition with some, small prizes for it as well. And then the last thing that I think really has helped with successful virtual training programs is structuring certification and using badging. You're not going to do every course as a certification, but picking the key ones, whether it's a skill certification or a technical certification, that way it's creating that standard, consistent level of learning. And then creating badging, especially digital badges that can be shared externally on platforms such as LinkedIn. That allows the learners to demonstrate and share their skill level, again, whether it's technical or soft skill, but they can share that out and build their own background and credibility as well.
Fantastic. And then, just to kind of pull this all together, so you spoke a little bit earlier about how virtual training helps save costs. You spoke about, the travel, the carbon footprint, etc. Is it really saving time and resources though? Can you just speak to that? Because maybe there's a perception that if we go virtual, it takes less time to create the content. You don't need as many facilitators. So are you really saving money and resources? Tell us more about that.
Well, there's definitely a trade-off. It does save, as I mentioned, the travel costs, the room, so that the actual delivery components. You don't have to have catering in, you don't have the transportation, you don't have the time out of the field. And it does allow your facilitators to probably fit in more training sessions if they're not going from from a location to location. But on the other end, it's just as challenging, if not even more challenging, in the instructional design phase of creating that virtual learning. And you do incur more costs when you're using some of that great technology that I mentioned. It is wonderful, but it doesn't come for free. So you're going to have more costs probably in the development. It's also a totally different instructional designer skill set to develop virtual instructor-led versus in-person instructor-led, and then different engagement tools. So there's absolutely a trade-off. The travel and the accommodations is cheaper, but I think the development is probably a little bit more expensive.
So Tara, thank you. We did the pros and cons for the virtual instructor-led training. Let's pivot now to the in-person training. Let's discuss that a little bit. How do you think in-person training can be beneficial for learners?
Well, first of all, it's a very different experience to be able to have face-to-face interaction with trainers and also with other learners. In fact, there's been numerous studies that have shown learner retention rates are significantly higher when you have in-person or one-to-one training versus virtual. Secondly, it really allows the trainer to, read the room and adjust the content and activities depending on what's going on in the group. And you often don't see that in virtual, but you can pick up on both, visual and audio cues when you're in the room. It also really helps build this great sense of community when you're all in a room together. And that extends well beyond the training session. Many companies have new hire training where the new hires go through an in-person training together. And what I found at a couple of different companies is people have built relationships in new hire in-person training that have lasted years and sometimes throughout their entire careers. So you get that sense of time with the other learners as well as with the person that are a little bit more difficult in a virtual environment.
Thank you, Tara. And in your experience, what are the advantages of in-person training compared to virtual instructor-led training? What are the advantages of doing it in person?
Well, I think number one is real-time feedback and coaching that is specific to that person. You can do it virtual if you want to go into a breakout room, but it's much more difficult, and I don't think it's as meaningful. First of all, depending on the topic, but it's difficult to read the person's body language and share more when you're only seeing, part of it. So you can give much more effective feedback and sharing. Secondly, there's less distractions. You don't have the urge to multitask. Also important is less technical difficulties. How many times when you're doing a virtual session have you had to say, can you come off of mute? Or we can't hear you, or because of delays, people overtalk, or you lose people because their internet dropped or something happened. So you tend to have less technical difficulties, which not only can drop a learner, but can distract for everybody else in the session.
Thank you. I agree 100%. In your opinion, how does in-person training help to create a more engaging learning experience, if indeed it does?
Well, first off, it's, hands-on training is much more available and logistically easier. In-person training, really allows the learners to have that opportunity. It could be, role play or interactive simulations, or it can be something technical. For example, in healthcare, engineering, or manufacturing, maybe it's a physical skill that they need to practice that you can do when you're all in one room together. Secondly, you can really build in physical activities. And by this, I mean, for example, we may do what we call a gallery walk. When we're doing training, we'll put up pieces of paper all around the room, and we'll get everybody up out of their seats, walking around to write ideas or write answers or whatever the activity is. That physical activity helps improve focus, it helps improve retention, and it helps keep the energy up as well. And again, you're removing a lot of those distractions. People can really stay much more focused, which is going to increase the retention of their training when they're in person.
Thank you. And can you share some examples of successful in-person training programs that you've either done, been part of, or you've seen? And again, what has made them effective and successful?
Sure. We've developed several series of skills-based training that were highly effective, have won Brandon Hall Awards as well. And one I'll focus on was really presentation skills training, which you can do virtually, but it's just not the same. If you do it virtual, it's got to be a little micro. But when you can get people in a room to do presentation or speaking effectiveness training, you can really focus on, let's talk about a micro skill, let's demonstrate it, and then let the learners practice it in front of each other. Because again, you're going to learn just as much by observing a fellow learner and providing feedback as you are by practicing. That's really difficult to replicate virtually. And it also gives you the opportunity to practice in a safer environment. You want people to practice skills in a room where they can get feedback from their trainers versus trying it, in front of a customer or a client for the first time. Now, even in large scale sessions, like at, sales kickoff events, you still have real life situations where you practice them in a group simulation with the feedback from each other. And that's where you get the success, where you have them organized, you're able to put them into smaller groups. You're allowed to do the let's learn, let's see a demonstration of how it should be, let's practice, and let's get feedback. And that whole loop you can repeat much more effectively when you're in person and increase that skill, knowledge, as well as the retention.
Thank you, Tara. Now, just to kind of conclude, similar in the similar way to the virtual instructor-led training, pros and cons. What's better? In-person training, as you mentioned earlier, helps to provide hand-on training and demonstrations that maybe a virtual training cannot offer. Can you tell us a little bit more about the retention rate? I'm sure I'm certain that there are uses for virtual instructor-led training. There are use cases, if you will, when you do virtual training, which is self-paced, virtual instructor-led training, which is, in this type of environment that people are viewing now, and also as well in person, in a room, rubbing shoulders with your colleagues, having that tacit conversation. So is one truly better than the other? Does the virtual instructor-led training, is the retention longer than in person? Can you kind of close us out with giving that kind of your thoughts in the retention rate of virtual versus self-paced virtual and in person, if you can?
Yeah, and there's actually two different pieces I want to talk about: the retention rate, but also the learner confidence rate. So let me talk about that first. For example, if you're learning a new physical skill, let's say a healthcare worker is learning a new blood draw technique, being able to practice it in a training session where you're in person really helps build their confidence before they go out and start using that technique on a patient. So it's building the learner confidence. And that applies even in a soft skill. For example, if the salesperson is learning a new sales pitch, being able to practice it in a room with other people, because it's different talking to just your computer versus, looking a person face to face, reading their body language, getting that feedback. Allowing people to practice until they build up their confidence is going to not only reinforce that skill, but help them deliver and use that new skill much more effectively. And then on that second point, the law of diminishing return is really how long are you going to retain that knowledge? And that's what training is all about. Training is not just a one and done. You've got to make sure that people retain it as long as possible. And numerous studies have shown that if you're just listening to a lecture, I think the number, don't quote me, but I think the number's around 5%. You're going to retain 5% of that information. Versus when you go to virtual learning, that jumps up a little bit higher to maybe 50%. But when you get to in-person learning, that's averaging around 75%. You're retaining 75% of what you learned. And then when you have the luxury of going to one-on-one training, that retention goes up to as high of 90% of the information is going to be retained. So going from, straight lecture or virtual, you are going to have almost a twofold increase in the retention level of what you've trained on.
Thank you. I mean, Tara, in conclusion, the retention, if the knowledge that people wish to transfer to their sales force to keep them active and current, in person is definitely the way to go. They retain 75% of it, and it's going to last for longer. That retention's lasting longer. but there are instances when virtual instructor-led training is absolutely the way to go, certainly from a cost perspective, and also as well recognizing that you will have to probably retrain on that subject matter more frequently than you would in person. So just to close off, thank you very much, Tara. I just want to share with our viewers, keep your questions coming, and we'll bring the experts in to share their responses with you. Enablement is not just a buzzword. It's a critical component of driving success in today's competitive sales landscape. I hope today's conversation with Tara has given you some practical tips and ideas for thinking about your own sales enablement strategies when it comes to, is it just like a show and tell? Is it, is it a virtual self-paced? Is it virtual instructor-led, or is it in person? Really think about, what your business objectives are when you decide how to build and deliver your enablement to your field. Thank you for joining us on Good Morning Enablement. Tara, I look forward to continuing the discussion in future episodes, so thank you very much for being with us. And to our viewers, if you want to see more of this type of content, please feel free to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button, and we'll let you know when there's more to come. We do have links in the comments to our website, which has previous episodes and other useful information. You can subscribe to the newsletter and even download content from the shows. Now, if you would like to have content created for you, have master facilitators or enablement professionals come and help you build a content strategy and stand and deliver, whether it's virtual, self-paced, or in person, please reach out to us and we will help connect you with the right enablement professionals to help you be successful in all that you do. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching.